A woman beaten half to death in a rain-soaked alley over $40. A Mafia king steps out of the darkness and speaks three words that change everything. Bring her to me. She expected a bullet. What she got was worse. A gilded cage inside the most dangerous empire in the city, owned by the most feared man alive. Stay until the end, because nothing about this story goes the way you think. If this hits you, smash that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Nah. The rain had been falling for 3 hours without mercy. It came down in sheets, the kind that turned gutters into rivers, and soaked through every layer a person owned within 30 seconds of stepping outside. The alley behind Club Nero ran narrow and dark between two buildings that had no business being as expensive as they were, their back walls slick with grime and old grease from the kitchen vents above. A single security light mounted above the club's rear exit buzzed and flickered, the bulb half dead, throwing just enough yellow light to see by and not nearly enough to feel safe. Evelyn Mercer was on the ground. She had gone down after the second kick, her knees hitting the wet concrete so hard she felt it in her back teeth, and she hadn't been able to get back up. Not because she hadn't tried. She had tried twice, gotten her hands under her and pushed, and both times her arms had given out like wet cardboard. Now she was on her side with her cheek pressed against the pavement, tasting blood from somewhere inside her mouth, listening to the rain hammer the ground 6 inches from her face. Above her, Denny Falk kept talking. Denny Falk was 41 years old and worked collections for a man named Ortega, who ran a street-level loan operation out of a laundromat on Merchant Street. He was not a large man. He was not a particularly frightening-looking man under normal circumstances. Medium height, a gut that pressed against his rain jacket, thinning hair plastered flat to his skull by the downpour. What made him dangerous was the complete absence of anything in his eyes that resembled hesitation. He had been doing this kind of work for 11 years and had never once lost sleep over it. $40, he said. His voice was conversational. That was the worst part. You want me to explain to Mr. Ortega that you couldn't manage $40? Evelyn said nothing. She was working on breathing. Her ribs were screaming on the left side, and she was trying to figure out if that was bruised or broken, the way you did when you'd been hurt before and had learned to take stock of damage before deciding how to move. You had 2 weeks, Denny continued. He nudged her with the toe of his boot. Not a kick. A nudge. Like he was checking whether something on the ground was alive. 2 weeks. What were you doing for 2 weeks, Evelyn? Working, she said. The word came out thick. Working. He repeated it like she'd said something amusing. You're a cleaning woman. You work nights at 3 different locations. I've got your schedule right here. He tapped his temple. And you couldn't scrape together $40. She could have explained it to him. She could have told him about the water heater that had failed in October, and the landlord who had told her in no uncertain terms that repairs were her problem since she'd been late twice this year already, and that the plumber had taken $220 she hadn't had, which meant the payment to Ortega had been pushed back. And then the agency that placed her at the Harwick Tower offices had lost a contract and cut her Thursday shift. And then the car. But none of that mattered to Denny Falk. She understood that. She had understood it the moment she'd seen him waiting outside her building that evening, hands in his pockets, patient as stone. Get up, he said. She tried. She really did. She got her right arm under her and pushed, and her ribs sent a white bolt of pain up through her chest that stole the air right out of her lungs, and she went back down. Denny sighed like a man running out of patience with a slow machine. The kick that came next was not a nudge. It caught her in the lower back, not hard enough to do permanent damage. Denny was professional enough to know where the lines were, but hard enough that she cried out, the sound bouncing off the wet walls and going nowhere. Swallowed by the rain and the bass thumping through Club Nero's back wall, she pressed her forehead to the pavement and focused on not blacking out. She was 24 years old. She had been living in this city for 3 years, having come from a town 2 states away that she never intended to return to under any circumstances. And in 3 years, she had learned certain things with the clarity that only comes from necessity. She had learned that the city did not care about her. She had learned that debt was a living thing with teeth. She had learned that being small and female and broke in a bad part of town after midnight was a particular kind of vulnerability that no amount of awareness could fully protect against. She had not learned how to stop. That was the only thing she had going for her right now. She didn't know how to stop. She got her hand flat on the concrete again. "Don't," Denny said, almost bored. She pushed anyway. She got to her hands and knees this time, head hanging, rain dripping from her nose and chin, the broken alley floor 6 inches below her face. She could see a candy wrapper and a flattened cigarette butt and the reflection of the security light in a puddle of water. Her arms were shaking. Her left side was one continuous note of pain. Denny's boot connected with her ribs. She went down again, harder this time, her shoulder taking the impact, and she lay there with her eyes open and her cheek against the cold ground, and she thought very clearly that this was going to be the way it ended. Not dramatically, not with any kind of meaning attached to it. Just a woman in an alley in the rain over $40 she genuinely did not have. That was when she heard the cars. She didn't see them at first. She heard them, the near-silent purr of high-performance engines running at low speed, the sound almost swallowed by the rain, the soft crunch of tires on wet gravel. Multiple vehicles, moving slow. She felt it more than heard it, a shift in the weight of the air in the alley, the way sound changes when large things enter a space. Denny heard it too. She heard his breathing change. The vehicles stopped. She heard doors open, not all at once, but in sequence, controlled, deliberate. She heard footsteps, more than 2 people, moving with the kind of quiet that required discipline. She turned her head slowly and saw them through the rain. 4 black SUVs parked bumper to tail across the alley entrance, their headlights off. Around them stood men in dark clothes. She couldn't count them clearly. Her vision was blurred from the blow to her head, and they had arranged themselves in a loose perimeter without anyone giving an audible command. Between the second and third vehicle, a man stood still. She almost missed him because he wasn't moving and wasn't trying to make himself seen. He stood with his hands in the pockets of a charcoal overcoat, the rain falling on him like it fell on everything else, completely indifferent to it. Tall, dark-haired, though the rain and the poor light made specific details difficult. He was looking at her, not at Denny, at her. Denny took 1 step back, then stopped himself because stepping back was an admission. "This is a private matter," Denny said. His voice had changed. The conversational ease was gone. The man in the overcoat said nothing. One of the men standing near the vehicles walked forward and stopped 6 feet from Denny. He didn't say anything either. He just stood there. And there was something in the way he stood. The absolute absence of tension, the stillness of someone who had never once in their life needed to prove they were dangerous, that made Denny go very quiet. "I don't want trouble," Denny said. The man in the overcoat turned his head slightly and said something to the person nearest him, quiet enough that Evelyn couldn't make out the words. The rain took them. 2 of the men moved toward Denny. What happened next was fast and not particularly dramatic. There was no struggle. Denny made a sound, a single, sharp exhale. And then he was being walked backward toward the alley wall with a kind of mechanical efficiency that suggested the 2 men had done this or something very like it many times before. Then the man in the overcoat walked forward. He walked slowly, hands still in his pockets, and stopped maybe 4 feet from where Evelyn lay on the ground. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Up close, in the flickering half-light, she could see his face more clearly. He was somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s. She couldn't be certain. His face was the kind that gave nothing away easily. High cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it had been cut with a straight edge. A scar ran from just below his left ear to the hinge of his jaw, thin and pale, old enough to have settled into his skin. His eyes were dark, the exact color impossible to read in this light, but the quality of them was unmistakable. They were the eyes of someone who made decisions other people spent years trying to forget. He studied her for a long moment. Not the way you study someone you feel sorry for, more like the way you study something unexpected, something you weren't planning on finding here but are now reconsidering. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, not soft. There was nothing soft about it, but quiet the way a blade is quiet. It didn't need volume. "Bring her to me," he said. She thought she'd misheard. She thought it must be the knock to her head making words rearrange themselves into things that didn't make sense. She waited for the follow-up, the dismissal, the instruction to leave her alone and move on. It didn't come. 2 of his men crouched beside her and their hands were firm but not rough. and before she could form a coherent protest, she was being lifted from the ground, and the alley was receding below her, and the rain was still falling. And the last thing she saw before the car door closed was Denny Falk standing against the alley wall with one of the men beside him, perfectly still. And Denny's face had the expression of someone trying very hard not to think about what was going to happen next. The car was warm. That was the first coherent thought she had, that the interior was warm and dry, and the leather seat she was on was softer than anything she'd sat on in recent memory. And those two facts together felt grotesquely wrong given every other fact present in the situation. She was in the back seat of an SUV, surrounded by men she didn't know being driven somewhere she hadn't agreed to go, and the seat was warm and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and she had blood on her face. The man in the overcoat was not in this vehicle. A man she hadn't noticed before sat in the front passenger seat, turned partially toward her. He was younger than the others, whose mid-20s, with close-cropped hair and watchful eyes. He handed her something. She looked down. A folded cloth, white, cloth not paper. She stared at it. "Your face," he said, and his voice was neutral, carrying no particular warmth or threat. She took the cloth. She pressed it to her cheekbone, where the skin had split. She felt the familiar sick warmth of blood that had been running for a while. "Where are you taking me?" she said. It came out flat, not quite a question. "Mr. Viscari's estate," the man said. "Viscari," she repeated. He didn't elaborate. She looked out the window. The city moved past in the dark and rain. Streets she recognized giving way to streets she didn't. The buildings getting farther apart, the lights getting fewer, the road surface smoothing out beneath the tires. She pressed the cloth to her face and watched the city thin out and tried to think clearly. Lucian Viscari. The name hit her in stages. The first stage was basic recognition. She'd heard it, everyone had heard it. It was not a name people in the city said carelessly or casually. The second stage was the understanding of what that name meant in practical terms. An organization that controlled the import and financial infrastructure of half the city's shadow economy, that had survived 4 federal investigations without a single conviction, whose leadership had not changed in 12 years because no one had successfully challenged it and survived. The third stage was the understanding that she was currently in one of his cars, going to one of his properties, having been picked up by him personally from an alley where she'd been beaten over a $40 debt. None of those stages produced a response she could act on. She looked down at the white cloth in her hand. It was already marked with red. She folded it to a clean section and pressed it back against her face and said nothing else for the rest of the drive. The estate revealed itself slowly, the way large properties did when they were designed by people who understood that approach mattered. The road curved through dense trees that screened the grounds from the outside world completely, and then opened into a wide forecourt lit by recessed lighting set into the ground, the kind of lighting that illuminated without blazing. The main house was enormous without being ostentatious about it. Dark stone, multiple wings, windows that were the heavy-framed kind that said reinforced without advertising it. There were 2 men at the gate who watched the convoy pass without expression. There were more at the main entrance. She was helped from the vehicle with that same efficient, impersonal care. The rain was lighter here, sheltered by the trees, and someone produced an umbrella over her head without being asked. She was walked, not carried, through the entrance and into a foyer that was large enough to contain her entire apartment building's ground floor. She stopped walking. The man beside her, not the one from the car, a different one, paused. "I need to know what's happening," she said. "A doctor will see you," he said. "I didn't ask about a doctor. Mr. Viscari will speak with you when you've been seen by the doctor." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the patient expression of someone who had said what he was going to say and had nothing to add. She was in no condition to fight. She knew that. Her ribs were possibly broken, her head had taken 2 impacts, and she was running on adrenaline that was going to run out in the next few minutes. She also had nowhere to go. She had been removed from the alley, which, whatever else was true, meant she was no longer on the ground in the rain with Denny Falk standing over her. And until she had more information, causing a scene in the foyer of Lucian Viscari's estate seemed like the specific kind of poor decision that would not improve her situation. She let them walk her through the house. The doctor was a woman of around 50, compact and efficient, who introduced herself as Dr. Reyes and asked questions in the clipped shorthand of someone who had been doing this long enough to need only the relevant details. She prodded Evelyn's ribs, 2 bruised, none broken, cleaned the cut on her cheekbone, examined her pupils, asked her to follow a light. She worked without commentary on how Evelyn had come to be in this condition, and Evelyn offered none. "You need rest and something for the pain," Dr. Reyes said. "I'd prefer you stayed off your feet tonight." "That may not be up to me," Evelyn said. The doctor glanced at her and said nothing. The room they put her in was on the 2nd floor. It was clean and large and had a window that was, she noted immediately, fitted with locks that required a key from the inside. Not from the outside, from the inside, which meant she could not open it without a key she did not have. The door, when she tested it after the escort left, was unlocked but opened onto a hallway with a man stationed at the far end who looked up when she appeared and looked back down again with the calm of someone who didn't need to say anything. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went back inside. She sat on the edge of the bed, because the bed was there and her legs were done, and she looked at the room around her and took it apart systematically, the way she had learned to take things apart. The window? Locked. The door? Watched. The phone on the nightstand she checked. No outside line. The room itself. No personal items. Nothing that indicated it was regularly occupied. A guest room, or something designed to function as one. The closet contained clothes, women's clothes, several sizes, all of them expensive, still tagged. Someone had been prepared for a female occupant of uncertain dimensions. She sat with that for a moment. Then she lay back on the bed without removing her shoes and stared at the ceiling and tried to think past the pain in her side and the headache building at the base of her skull. She was not dead. That was the first fact. Whatever Lucian Viscari intended, she was not dead, which meant he wanted something from her that required her to be alive. That was useful information. People who wanted something from you could be negotiated with, at least in theory. People who simply wanted to cause harm gave you no leverage. Alive meant leverage existed, even if she couldn't see it yet. The door opened without a knock. She sat up fast, which was a mistake. Her ribs registered their protest immediately, and found herself looking at Lucian Viscari. He had removed the overcoat. He wore a dark shirt, open at the collar, and he moved into the room like a man who had never had to announce himself in any space he entered, because every space he entered understood without announcement that he owned it. He stopped near the window, which put her at a slight disadvantage in terms of the light, and looked at her with the same measuring quality she'd seen in the alley. "How are your ribs?" he said. "Bruised," she said. "Not broken." He nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Sit," he said. "I'm already sitting." Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. He pulled the chair from beside the small desk and sat down himself, which brought his eyes level with hers and removed some of the positional advantage she'd been thinking about. She filed that away. A man who understood positioning well enough to adjust it deliberately. "Evelyn Mercer," he said. 24, originally from Carlisle, 2 states west. You've been in this city for 31 months. You hold cleaning contracts with 3 commercial agencies and 1 direct arrangement with a residential property on Elmore Street. You've been delinquent on a $600 loan from Ortega's operation for approximately 2 months, of which $40 was the outstanding installment. She said nothing. He had her file, or something that functioned as one. "The man who put you on the ground," Viscari said. "His name was Denny Falk. He worked for Ortega." "Was," she said. "Is a word that changes," he said. She looked at him steadily. "What do you want from me?" "I'm not sure yet," he said. "But something you did recently suggested you might be worth finding out." She waited. "Ortega's loan records," Viscari said. He reached into his shirt pocket and removed a folded paper, which he set on the edge of the bed near her without handing it to her. She didn't touch it. 3 weeks ago, a payment of $40 was entered into his system and then reversed. The reversal was clean. No flag, no error code. It moved through the system the way a legitimate reversal moves. Ortega's people didn't notice it for 11 days. Evelyn felt something in her chest that was not pain from her ribs. "You moved $40 through an accounting system that was designed to flag unauthorized entries," Viscari said. "You didn't steal it outright. You entered it as a payment and then reversed the reversal without the reversal generating a flag. That's not something you do by accident. That's not something most people with formal financial training could do without leaving traces. He paused. You have no formal financial training. I have a GED and a library card, she said. I know. She looked at the paper on the bed. She still didn't touch it. It didn't work, she said. He still came after me. Someone on Ortega's staff found the anomaly on a manual review, Viscari said. It took them 11 days. You had almost made it. He looked at her with the expression of a man evaluating a tool he'd found in an unexpected place. Where did you learn to move money through accounting systems? I read, she said, specifically. I worked a placement at a mid-sized freight company for 8 months. They let me do data entry. I started reading everything in the system, the way entries were structured, the way flags were triggered. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was just reading. She paused. Then I needed $40. He was quiet for a moment. I have a problem, he said. I have several, she said. That almost amusement shifted in his face again, and she noted it and put it away. Humor was information. Everything was information. I have money missing, Viscari said. Not $40. A significant amount. It's been moving out of my organization through channels that are structured to look like legitimate operational variants. Whoever is doing it is good. My accountants have been looking at it for 2 months and have not identified the mechanism. He looked at her. I need someone who reads differently than my accountants read. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. You took me out of an alley, she said, to do your accounting. I took you out of an alley, he said, because you were about to be seriously injured and because what I knew about you suggested you might be useful. The accounting is the opportunity I'm offering you. And if I say no? You go back, he said simply. With enough money to clear Ortega's debt and a recommendation that keeps his people away from you, you walk out the front door in the morning. She studied his face. He said it the way a man said things he meant. And if I say yes, you stay, you work, you are compensated. You do not leave without my knowledge. He met her eyes. I won't pretend this is a conventional arrangement. It's a cage, she said. It's an arrangement, he said. The distinction matters. She looked around the room. The locked window, the tagged clothes in the closet, the phone with no outside line. Then she looked back at him. I want to see the books, she said. Something in his posture changed, barely perceptible. Now? If I'm going to decide whether this problem is solvable, I need to see what I'm looking at. She held his gaze. I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm asking to see the books. He studied her for a moment that stretched longer than she expected. Then he stood. Come with me, he said. The office was 2 floors down and nothing like the rest of the house. The rest of the house was controlled, deliberate in its aesthetic, the kind of space that had been put together by someone who understood that environment communicated authority. The office was a working room, no art on the walls, a desk that was a scarred and functional piece of furniture rather than a statement, shelves lined with binders and ledgers and stacked paper that had the look of things consulted daily. A single overhead light burned bright and cold. He opened a lateral filing cabinet and removed 3 binders, setting them on the desk in front of her. She pulled the first one open. The entries were structured in a format she didn't immediately recognize. Not standard commercial accounting notation. Something closer to a hybrid of 2 different systems, one of which she'd seen in the freight company's books, and one of which she'd read about in an academic paper she'd found through an interlibrary loan request 8 months ago. It was intentionally obscure. It would take someone who knew both systems to even read it, let alone identify irregularities. She read. Viscari stood near the door with his arms at his sides and didn't say anything. The clock on the wall moved. She turned pages. She traced columns with her finger without touching the paper, following the logic of it, the way numbers were supposed to flow, and the places where the flow didn't quite cohere. 20 minutes in, she found something. It was small. A rounding notation in a transfer category that appeared 4 times over 8 months, each instance associated with a different operational account. The notation itself was correct. It matched the system's formatting exactly, but the rounding direction was wrong. Not wrong enough to trigger a flag. Just wrong enough that if you followed the cumulative direction of every rounding instance, the money wasn't being rounded down into reserve. It was being rounded into a buffer account that shouldn't exist. She looked up. Viscari was watching her. How many accounts are active in this operational classification? She said. He moved to the desk and opened the second binder. 14. Show me accounts 7, 9, and 12. He found them, set them in front of her. She looked. 30 seconds. There, she said. She pointed to the buffer account notation, showed him the 4 instances in the first binder, showed him where the same notation appeared in account 9, structured differently but functioning identically, showed him how the amounts accumulated, how they never crossed a threshold that would trigger a review, how they were being moved in increments small enough to look like operating noise. Viscari looked at the pages. He looked at them for a long time. This has been running for 8 months, he said. At minimum, she said. Depending on when the mechanism was introduced, possibly longer. The accounts I can see only go back this far. I need to know where the buffer account is sending. I'd need to see the subledger for the transfer classifications. That's not in these binders. He went to the cabinet again. He came back with 2 more binders and a ring of folders. He set them down without comment. She kept reading. It was past 3 in the morning when she found the destination. The buffer account was running through a layered series of shell notations, not actual shell companies, she couldn't verify those from ledger entries alone, but notational shells, placeholder codes that routed the accumulated amounts through what appeared to be a legitimate vendor payment category before the trail went cold at the edge of what was documented here. But the vendor code was one she recognized. She had seen it twice before, in the third binder, attached to payments made to a specific operational category managed by a specific executive-level account. She sat back. Viscari was on the other side of the desk. He'd been standing for most of the past 2 hours without appearing to notice it. I need a name, she said. He didn't move. Show me. She turned the ledger toward him and walked him through it. The buffer entries, the routing, the vendor code, the executive account. She watched his face while he read. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did, something that moved through his eyes like weather moving across water. There and gone. That account belongs to Marcus Hale, he said. I don't know who that is. My chief financial director, Viscari said. His voice was completely flat. For 9 years. Evelyn said nothing. She watched him look at the ledger entries and understood, without needing it explained, that what she had just handed him was not only a financial betrayal, but a personal one. She understood also that what happened to Marcus Hale next was information she did not want to have. She closed the binder. I'm tired, she said. He looked at her, coming back from wherever he had gone. He straightened. Go sleep, he said. Am I staying? She said it carefully. You helped me, he said. Yes. You're staying. She stood up from the desk, slowly, her ribs reminding her they were still there. She moved toward the door and stopped. The $40, she said, without turning around. It's handled, he said. She didn't ask what that meant. She walked out of the office and back through the house and up to the room with the locked window and the tagged clothes, and she lay down on the bed and was asleep inside of 4 minutes. She was deep in that sleep, the absolute black dreamless kind that came from the body shutting itself down against her will when the sound reached her. Not a sound from inside the house, from outside. A low concussive thud that she felt as much as heard, the kind of impact that set windows vibrating in their frames. Then another. Then the distinctive flat crack of gunfire, multiple weapons, not close but not far enough. She was on her feet before she was fully awake. The window's glass was trembling in its reinforced frame. Through it, in the dark grounds below, she could see lights moving, flashlights, the erratic movement of people running, and then a bloom of orange from somewhere on the west side of the estate that painted the sky above the tree line. Fire. The bedroom door burst open. One of Viscari's men, she didn't know his name, she didn't know any of their names, filled the doorway with a face stripped of everything except urgency. Move, he said. Now. And somewhere behind him, deeper in the house, she heard a second explosion, and the lights went out. The lights came back on in 8 seconds. Evelyn knew because she counted. Standing in the doorway of the bedroom with her back against the frame and her eyes moving through the dark hallway, tracking the sounds. Footsteps running, voices clipped and low, the distant percussion of gunfire that hadn't stopped since the second explosion. 8 seconds of absolute black. And then the emergency system kicked in, and the hallway filled with a dim red-tinted light from fixtures she hadn't noticed before, recessed into the ceiling, running on a separate power source. The man who had come for her, broad-shouldered, dark jacket, a radio clipped to his collar, grabbed her arm above the elbow. "Don't pull," she said. He didn't let go, but he stopped pulling. "We need to move." "Where's Viscari?" "Moving. Come on." She moved. He kept his hand on her arm, not rough, but immovable, and they went down the hallway at a pace that was almost running. The red emergency light made everything look like the inside of something wounded. At the far end of the hall, 2 more men appeared from a stairwell she hadn't known was there. A narrow one, servants' access or security access, the door flush with the wall and painted the same color. One of them said something into his radio in a shorthand she couldn't decode. The gunfire outside was getting louder. Not closer, she told herself. Just louder because she was more awake now, because her hearing had sharpened the way it did when the body understood it was in danger. She tried to believe that as they went down the narrow stairs, single file, fast, the walls close enough on both sides that she could feel the air pressure change with each step. They came out into a corridor she hadn't seen, below the main floor, she thought, or at the back of the ground level. Stone floor, lower ceilings, lighting that was practical rather than designed. They passed a door that was armored, she could tell by the thickness of the frame, and then another, and at the end of the corridor a heavy door stood open with 2 men on either side of it. Viscari was inside. The panic room was not what she had imagined, though she hadn't had time to imagine much. It was large, larger than her apartment, with walls that were visibly reinforced and a bank of monitors on the far wall showing security camera feeds from around the estate. Some of the feeds were intact. Some showed static. 2 showed fire. Viscari stood in front of the monitors with his hands at his sides and his back to the door. He turned when she entered. His face was exactly what it had been 2 hours ago in the office. Controlled, giving nothing. But there was something moving beneath that control tonight that hadn't been there before. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the way his eyes tracked between the monitors and the door, with a frequency that wasn't habitual. It was vigilance with an edge of something he was managing. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand." He looked at her for a moment and then looked back at the monitors. "Fine." 3 of his men were in the room. The broad-shouldered one who had brought her down. A second one, leaner, who was on a phone call conducted entirely in clipped monosyllables. A third stationed at the door, facing out into the corridor. The door was closed now, and she heard the locks engage. Multiple locks, the sound of serious engineering. "How many entry points are compromised?" Viscari said. The lean man lowered the phone. "West gate is down. The garage approach is contested. The north perimeter is holding." "How many of them?" "At least 12 confirmed, possibly more." "Who?" The lean man hesitated. That hesitation was small and he controlled it quickly, but Evelyn saw it. Viscari saw it too. She could tell by the way he turned his head. "Caruso's people," the lean man said. Something in the room changed. It was not a sound and not a movement. It was atmospheric, the way a temperature drop was atmospheric. Viscari didn't move. His expression didn't shift, but the men in the room became very still. "Say that again," Viscari said. "The vehicle registration on the burned SUV at the west gate came back to a holding company we've flagged before. It's Caruso's flag." Evelyn filed the name, Caruso. She didn't know the name from the ledgers she'd been reading, which meant it was a name that belonged to a different kind of record entirely. Viscari turned back to the monitors. He looked at the feed showing fire on the west side of the estate. The orange bloom she'd seen from her window, now larger. The camera angle showing flames consuming what looked like a vehicle depot or storage structure. He watched it with the expression of a man adding a column of figures. "Marcus?" he said. The lean man, whose name Evelyn had now gathered was Tomas, went still in a different way. "We don't know that," Tomas said carefully. "Caruso and Marcus Hale have been moving money together for 8 months, Viscari said. His voice was the same volume it always was. That was the worst thing about it. It never rose. "The woman found it in 2 hours. You want to tell me this is a coincidence in timing?" Tomas said nothing. "Where's Marcus right now?" We haven't located him in the house." "He's not in the house," Viscari said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn looked at the monitors. She counted the feeds. 16 cameras, of which 11 were currently functional. She found the one covering the main entrance and watched it. No movement. She found the one covering the rear courtyard and watched two of Viscari's men take up position behind a stone wall, weapons up, tracking something outside the camera's angle. Then she found the feed covering what looked like a side exit, a door set into the estate's perimeter wall, partially obscured by plantings. And there, in the corner of the frame, she saw a figure moving quickly, low and fast, toward the wall. "Monitor 11, she said. Every person in the room looked at her. She pointed at the screen. "Bottom left camera. Someone's at the side exit." Tomas crossed the room in 4 strides. He looked at the monitor, his jaw tightened. "That's the East Garden access," he said. He got his radio up. "East Garden access, I need eyes on." "He's already through," Viscari said quietly. He was right. The figure on the monitor had reached the wall and the door in the frame had opened. It had been unlocked from the outside, she realized, which meant someone had arranged that in advance. And then the figure was gone, the door swinging shut behind them in the orange-tinted dark. The room was very quiet for a moment. Tomas lowered his radio slowly. He looked at Viscari. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who had known Lucian Viscari for long enough to understand exactly what the silence meant. "I'll handle it," Tomas said. "You'll find him," Viscari said. "That's all. Find him and bring him back. Nothing else until I say." "He's running to Caruso's people. Find him and bring him back." Viscari's voice didn't change pitch or volume. "Am I unclear?" Tomas looked at the closed door of the panic room, then back at Viscari. "No," he said. "You're not unclear." Viscari nodded once. Tomas moved to the door, said something to the man stationed there, and the lock cycled and the door opened and Tomas was gone and the lock cycled again. The gunfire outside had changed character. It was less frequent now, the bursts more spaced out, which either meant one side was gaining ground or both sides were reorganizing. Evelyn had no way to know which. She watched the monitors and tried to read them the way she read ledger entries, looking for patterns in what was there and what was absent. "You should sit," Viscari said. He wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at the monitors. "You said that already," she said. "Your ribs are bruised. Standing for extended periods is going to cost you." He paused. "There's a chair to your left." She looked. There was. She did not sit in it immediately, because sitting in it immediately would have felt like conceding something, and she was aware that was a completely irrational way to think about a chair, and she sat in it anyway. "How long have you known Tomas?" she said. 14 years. "Do you trust him?" He turned then, looked at her with an expression that held something closer to genuine evaluation than anything she'd seen from him yet. "Why?" "He hesitated before he told you it was Caruso's people," she said. "He already knew before you asked. He was deciding how to tell you, not remembering the information." Viscari was quiet for a moment. "You noticed that?" "I notice things." "Yes," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." He looked back at the monitors. Tomas knew about Caruso before tonight. He didn't know about Marcus. Those are 2 different kinds of hesitation. "How do you know which one it was?" "Because Tomas has been with me for 14 years, Viscari said. "I know what his face looks like when he's protecting me and what it looks like when he's protecting himself. Tonight it looked like protecting me. A beat. That's not a guarantee. But it's the read I have." From outside the reinforced walls came a sound she felt in her sternum. Another explosion, this one closer, the monitors flickering for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. The broad-shouldered man by the door put his hand to his radio earpiece and listened. "South approach is cleared," he said. "Caruso's people are pulling back." Viscari absorbed this without visible reaction. "Casualties. 2 of ours down, 1 critical." The man listened again. "Caruso's people left 3 behind." Evelyn looked at the fire still burning on the west side on monitor 6. The structure was mostly consumed now, the camera showing the black skeleton of what had been a building with orange light moving through it. She thought about how precisely the attack had needed to be timed, coming within hours of Marcus Hale's exposure, fast enough to possibly be an extraction attempt or a response to some signal Hale had sent when he understood what she'd found in the ledgers. She said it before she'd fully decided to. "He signaled them." Viscari looked at her. "Hale, she said. "When I was in the office with you, going through the books, When you pulled the subledger, he must have had a mechanism, something that triggered when his accounts were accessed at that level. A signal to Caruso that the arrangement was compromised. She worked through it, which means Caruso's operation was already staged. They were already close. They just needed the go signal. Viscari looked at her for a long moment without speaking. That's what it looks like, she said, less certainly. I could be wrong. You're not wrong, he said. It's what it looks like to me, too. He turned back to the monitors. Which means Caruso has been sitting on this operation for weeks, waiting. Marcus was the inside mechanism. The accounting was the cover. He paused. They wanted the estate. Or wanted you, she said. He didn't respond to that, which was its own kind of response. The broad-shouldered man's radio crackled again. He listened, and this time his expression shifted. Not much, but enough. Mr. Viscari, Tomas has a location on Hale. He's at the east boundary. Alive. Alive. Tomas says... The man stopped, listened. His face went through something. Tomas says Hale is asking to speak with you directly. He says he has information about tonight. Viscari was still looking at the monitors. His jaw moved once, the smallest adjustment, like something being set into place. Tell Tomas to bring him in, he said. And tell Tomas I said to count how many times Hale blinks when he walks through the door. The broad-shouldered man relayed this with the straight face of someone long past questioning instructions. And Evelyn thought that instruction, count how many times he blinks, was one of the most precise and unsettling pieces of tradecraft she had encountered in a night that had contained several. They waited. The monitor showed Viscari's men moving through the estate grounds, the systematic sweep that followed a perimeter breach. She watched them work in pairs, the movement disciplined and without wasted motion. The fire on the west side was dying down, either being managed or having consumed what it was going to consume. The static cameras remained static. 2 of them would not recover, she thought, the damage to their feeds too complete. The locks on the panic room door cycled. Tomas came in first, and behind him, held by 2 men, came Marcus Hale. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair that was disordered now, a dress shirt that had been expensive this morning and had not survived the evening intact. His wrists were bound with a cable tie, arms in front of him, and he moved with the stiff dignity of a man trying to retain something he had already lost. His face was showing the physical evidence of a struggle, a cut above his eyebrow, bruising along the right cheekbone. Either Tomas's men had been less careful than Viscari had instructed, or Marcus Hale had argued with physics on the way back and lost. He saw Viscari and stopped moving. The men holding his arms stopped with him. Viscari looked at him across the room. He said nothing. The silence extended. Marcus Hale broke it, which Evelyn suspected was exactly what Viscari had been waiting for. Lucian, he said. His voice was controlled, not entirely. I need you to let me explain. No, Viscari said. Hale's mouth closed. You don't explain, Viscari said. You answer. He moved closer, stopping with 3 feet between them, and he looked at Hale with the expression of a man examining damage he has already decided is irreparable. One question. Did you know they were coming tonight? Hale's eyes moved. They went to Tomas, to the men holding him, to Evelyn, and stopped on Evelyn with a flash of something she read clearly. It was not curiosity, it was recognition, not of her specifically, he'd never seen her before, but of what she represented. He understood what she was doing here. He understood, she realized, exactly what she had found in his ledgers. Yes or no? Viscari said. Hale's throat moved. There are things you don't know, he said, about Caruso, about why this happened. If you would just... Yes or no, Marcus? The room was absolutely still. Yes, Hale said. The words sat in the air. Viscari nodded once, with the finality of a door being closed. He turned to Tomas. Put him downstairs. I'll deal with it in the morning. Lucian. Hale's voice cracked on the name, a sound that surprised everyone in the room, Evelyn thought, including Hale himself. 9 years. 9 years I have done everything you asked. Everything. You have to hear why... Take him, Viscari said. Tomas stepped forward. The 2 men moved Marcus Hale toward the door, and Marcus Hale stopped cooperating with his own movement, and for approximately 4 seconds there was a scuffle that was ugly and undignified and ended with Marcus Hale being removed from the room with his feet moving again. The door closed behind him. The locks cycled. The room held its silence for a moment. Evelyn became aware, with a precision she could not have accounted for, of where Viscari was standing relative to her. 6 feet, slightly to her right, close enough that she could hear his breathing from here. It was controlled, slow, the breathing of a man who had learned to manage his respiratory response to stress in the same way he managed everything else. But it wasn't quite right. It was slightly too controlled, the way a person's breathing went when they were managing it on purpose rather than naturally. She looked at his left arm. The sleeve of his shirt, dark fabric, had gone darker in a spreading patch below the shoulder. She hadn't seen it before because the light in here was the same red-tinted emergency light as the corridor, which turned dark colors into uniform shadow. But the sleeve was wet, and the wet was spreading downward in the slow, decisive way that meant it had been going for a while. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down at his arm as if he'd forgotten about it. "It's minor. It's been going for—" She stood from the chair, moved toward him before she'd made a conscious decision to. "How long has that been bleeding?" "Since the first explosion," he said. He said it the way someone admitted to forgetting a minor errand. "There was glass." "Glass doesn't do that." She was close enough now to see the spread of it. "Or it doesn't do that by itself." He said nothing. "Let me see it," she said. He looked at her with the expression she was beginning to read as his version of mild surprise, the slight rearrangement of his features that happened when something went differently than he had mapped it. He looked at the broad-shouldered man, who was suddenly busy with his radio. Then Viscari rolled up the sleeve. The shrapnel wound was below the shoulder, maybe 2 inches of ragged entry where something metal and hot had gone in and stayed in. It was not the worst wound she had ever seen. She had grown up with a father who worked construction and a brother who had made a career of making bad decisions. But it was not minor, and it had been bleeding steadily for however long the attack had been running, and the iron smell of it was very present now that she was close enough. "You need a doctor," she said. "Dr. Reyes is on the East Wing," he said. "The East Wing is still in the estate somewhere. Call her." She looked at the broad-shouldered man. "Call her." The man looked at Viscari. Viscari held Evelyn's gaze for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully parse, and then he looked at the man and nodded. While they waited for Dr. Reyes, neither of them spoke. The monitor showed the sweep continuing outside. The fire on the west feed had gone dark, the camera showing only the blackened aftermath. Evelyn stood near Viscari without touching the wound, because touching it without materials was pointless, and she was aware of the proximity and the smell of blood, and the strange, displaced quality of the moment. The two of them in a reinforced room after an attack, waiting for a doctor, the night's full weight pressing down from above. "You should have told someone you were hit," she said. Not accusatory, factual. "It wasn't a priority," he said. "It became one." He looked at her with something she couldn't name in the red-tinted light. Not gratitude. She didn't think gratitude was a thing he expressed easily or early, not the measuring quality from the alley or the office. Something quieter than both, and for that reason, more unsettling. "Why did you point out the monitor?" he said. She blinked. "What?" 11, he said. "You didn't have to. You could have said nothing. The outcome for you either way is the same. You're in this room regardless." She thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. "It was the obvious thing to do. Most people in your position would not consider it obvious." "Most people in my position," she said, "would be calculating how to use it as leverage. And you weren't." She looked at him steadily. "I haven't decided yet whether that's the smarter play," she said. "Give me time." He held her gaze. And then, from a place she genuinely did not expect it, something moved across his face that was not quite a smile but was closer to one than she had seen on him all night, and it lasted approximately 1 second before it was gone. Dr. Reyes arrived with a bag and the efficient competence of someone who had been through worse than this, and she set about the wound with instruments and a focused silence, and Viscari sat in the chair Evelyn had been sitting in and let her work without expression. Evelyn stood back and watched the monitors. On the feed for the east boundary, she could see 2 of Tomas's men at the wall where the side exit was. The door in the perimeter wall stood open. Beyond it, in the darkness, she could see headlights moving away down a road she couldn't see clearly. Caruso's people, pulling back for real now. She watched the headlights diminish and thought about Marcus Hale going through that door and then being brought back through it, and the look on his face when his eyes had found her. The recognition. He had understood immediately that a stranger had read his work in 2 hours that his colleagues had missed for 8 months. That understanding was dangerous, not because of what Marcus Hale might do. Vescari had that in hand, or would, but because if Marcus Hale had understood, then Caruso's people would understand too. When Hale talked, and people in his position always talked, one way or another, he would explain exactly what had happened. He would explain that Vescari had a new resource. A woman pulled from an alley. A woman who could read accounts in ways his own people couldn't. That information would get out. And when it did, Evelyn Mercer, who had come into this house with nothing but bruised ribs and a library card, would become a very specific kind of target. She turned this over in her mind slowly, looking at the monitors, listening to the quiet sounds of the doctor working and the distant sounds of the estate reasserting its order. She thought about the envelope Vescari had not yet mentioned, the one in the story she was already telling herself about how this ended, where she took the money and the new identity and the transportation and left. She thought about the outside world, the alley, the rain, Denny Falk's boot. She thought about the fact that Caruso's people now knew her face, or would. She thought about what that meant for the story where she left. Dr. Reyes finished. She dressed the wound, issued instructions in the brisk shorthand of her profession, and packed her bag. She looked at Evelyn on her way to the door. "Your ribs," she said. "If the pain increases significantly, find me." "I will," Evelyn said. The door closed. The locks cycled. Vescari stood carefully, testing the arm. He looked at her across the room. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "I know," she said. "Hale will give Caruso your description," he said. "By morning, you're a known quantity in a conflict you didn't start." "I worked that out," she said, "which means the offer I made you, the envelope, the exit, has a shorter shelf life than I indicated." He held her gaze steadily. "If you walk out that door now, you do it with Caruso's network looking for a woman matching your description who they'll connect to the destruction of their 8-month operation. That's a different world than the one you walked into today." The monitors hummed. Somewhere above them, the estate was quiet and damaged and reasserting itself. "You're telling me I can't leave," she said. "I'm telling you leaving now is a different calculation than it was 6 hours ago," he said. "The choice is still yours. It always will be. But you should make it with accurate information." She looked at him, at the dressed wound, the controlled face, the eyes that gave up information in fractions, and only when they chose to. "And if I stay," she said. He looked back at her with the full weight of what that meant. "Then you're in this," he said. "All of it. There's no halfway position in what I do." She turned back to the monitors, watched the estate, watched the aftermath of a night that had started with her face on a wet alley floor and had somehow arrived here, in a reinforced room, with blood on the walls that wasn't hers, and a man who had been shot waiting for her answer. She had $40 and a library card when this started. She thought about the buffer account notation she'd found in the ledgers, the clean elegance of it, the way it had spoken to her like a sentence written in a language she hadn't known she was fluent in. She thought about how it had felt to point at the page and say there and watch certainty move through Vescari's face. She thought about what she could find if she had access to the full system. She was still thinking about it when the broad-shouldered man's radio crackled one more time, and his face changed in a way that made the air in the room change with it. "Mr. Vescari," he said slowly, "Tomas is on the line. Put him through." Static. Then Tomas's voice, and something in it that Evelyn had not heard from any of these men tonight, something stripped and flat and wrong. "Marcus Hale is dead," Tomas said. Vescari went very still. "I left 2 men with him," Tomas said. "We found them both down. And Marcus—" A pause that contained something. "Someone came through the east access after we brought him in. Someone who knew exactly where he was being held." The room held its breath. "Caruso has someone inside," Tomas said. The word inside hung in the air of the panic room like smoke after a fire, present, acrid, refusing to disperse. Vescari didn't move for 3 full seconds. Evelyn counted them. She had developed in the last several hours an involuntary habit of counting the pauses around this man, the way you counted the seconds between lightning and thunder to understand how close the storm actually was. "Lock it down," Viscari said into the radio. "Every access point, every interior door. Nobody moves through this house without 2 confirmed men on either side. You understand me?" "Understood," Tomas said. "And Tomas," Viscari's voice dropped half a register. "Find out who knew where Marcus was being held. Make me a list. Keep it short." The radio went quiet. Viscari set it on the desk beside the monitors and stood looking at the screens with his hands at his sides. And Evelyn watched him think. That was the only word for it. She could see it happening, the way you could see weather moving across open water, the surface changing as something large moved beneath it. The broad-shouldered man, she had heard someone call him Reeve, she filed it, stood near the door with the expression of a man waiting for instructions he expected to be difficult. "Who knew?" Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. "That Hale was being held downstairs," she said. "How many people in this house knew that specific location?" Viscari looked at Reeve. Reeve's jaw worked once. "Tomas, the 2 men he assigned, myself." A pause. "And anyone they communicated with over radio in the last 40 minutes. Were the radios encrypted?" she said. "Yes," Reeve said, then, slower, "standard encryption." "What does standard mean?" Reeve looked at Viscari. "It means good enough for ordinary operations," Viscari said. He was looking at Evelyn now with that measuring quality, but sharpened. "Not good enough for someone who's been inside long enough to know the protocols." She let that sit for a moment. Then, "How long has Caruso been building this?" "Long enough," Viscari said. "I need a number." He studied her. "Why?" "Because the accounting fraud ran 8 months. The attack tonight was staged and waiting, which means coordination that predates the signal from Hale. That's at least a year of infrastructure, probably more." She moved to the desk closer to the monitors. An operation that size inside your organization, it's not one person. It's a layer. Multiple people in different positions who don't necessarily know about each other. Marcus Hale was the financial mechanism. The person who killed him tonight is a different mechanism. The radio compromise, if that's how they located him, is a third. The room was very quiet. "You're describing a network," Viscari said. "I'm describing what the evidence suggests," she said. "You have a network inside your network. And Marcus Hale getting killed tonight before you could question him properly, that wasn't Caruso protecting his operation. That was Caruso protecting whoever is still in place." Viscari looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Reeve. Then he looked at the monitors, all 16 feeds, the one showing his men moving through his grounds, the one showing the east boundary, the one showing the burned-out structure on the west side. "Leave us," he said to Reeve. Reeve left without a word. The lock cycled. Viscari pulled a chair to the desk and sat down heavily, which was the first time she had seen him do anything that could be described as heavy. The wound on his arm was dressed, and the doctor had done good work, but the blood loss and the night together were writing something on his face that hadn't been there at the beginning. "My inner counsel," he said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He looked at the monitors. "The people who have full operational knowledge, there are 7 of them. Tomas is one." "You trust Tomas?" "I told you what I read in his face." "I know what you told me," she said. "I'm asking you now, knowing what you know now, whether you trust him." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. And the fact that he said it, that those 3 words came out of Lucien Viscari, the fact that she could hear in them the specific texture of something true, made the hair on her arm stand up, because a man like this admitting uncertainty about a person he'd known for 14 years was not a small thing. It was the kind of statement that cost something. "Tell me about the other 6, she said. He told her. Not everything. She understood she was getting what he decided to give her, the selective disclosure of a man who trusted in increments. But enough. 6 names, 6 roles, 6 brief profiles delivered in the flat, efficient shorthand of someone who had assessed these people so many times, the assessments had become compressed. She listened without writing anything down, because there was nothing to write on and because she didn't need to. She remembered things. It was the thing she was best at, and had been for as long as she could remember, and it had never mattered to anyone before tonight. When he finished, she sat with it. Caruso would need someone with access to operational scheduling, she said. Not finances. Marcus had that. Something different. Someone who knows movement patterns. Personnel assignments. Which men are stationed where on any given night. Viscari's eyes moved. Barely. But they moved. That's a specific function, she said. Who does that? In this organization, he said, that function runs through one person. A pause that contained something she couldn't name. Her name is Dana Voss. She's been my operations coordinator for 6 years. Evelyn looked at him. Where is she right now? Viscari reached for the radio. Dana Voss was located in the East Wing security room, which was where she was supposed to be during a lockdown, running communications, tracking personnel positions, coordinating the sweep. She was 38, efficient, and had a background in logistics that Viscari had recruited directly from a competing organization 6 years ago. When Reeve brought her to the panic room 20 minutes later, she came without resistance, which told Evelyn nothing useful because people who were genuinely guilty of something this calibrated didn't resist unnecessary things. She was compact, dark-haired, with the kind of face that processed information quickly and showed very little of what it did with the information afterward. She looked at Viscari when she entered and then looked at Evelyn with a brief, clean assessment that lasted less than 2 seconds. Lucian, she said. Professional, steady. What do you need? Sit down, Donna, he said. She sat. Walk me through tonight's personnel assignments, he said. From the beginning. Who was where and when you placed them? She walked him through it. The detail was impressive. Positions, times, radio channels, substitutions when 2 men had been moved from the south perimeter to reinforce the west gate before the attack began. She spoke with the ease of someone who had organized these logistics and had them accessible, the way Evelyn had the ledger entries accessible in her memory. Evelyn listened. She listened to what Dana Voss said, and she listened to the spaces between what she said, the places where the accounting should add up, and the places where it didn't quite. The west gate substitution, Evelyn said. Dana looked at her. You moved 2 men from the south perimeter to the west gate, Evelyn said, before the attack. Standard reinforcement protocol when the exterior sensor on that side registered the vehicle contact, Dana said smoothly. It's in the log. When did the exterior sensor register the contact? 11:47. And the attack began at... Evelyn looked at Viscari. 11:52, he said quietly. 5 minutes, Evelyn said. You moved 2 men from south to west with 5 minutes of lead time. How long does that movement take? A pause. Small. Controlled. But there. 4 to 5 minutes in a standard drill. So they would have arrived at the west gate, Evelyn said, at approximately the moment the attack began. Which means the south perimeter had a gap of 4 to 5 minutes during the period of highest threat, which happens to be the period during which Caruso's people breached the East Garden access. The room was very still. Dana Voss's face did not change dramatically. It changed the way ice changes when the temperature has been dropping for a while and finally crosses a threshold. Not explosively, but with a kind of irreversible settling, the expression of someone who has been found not by suspicion, but by arithmetic. You pulled south to create the East Gap, Evelyn said. That's... Dana started. The sensor triggered at 11:47, Evelyn said, but the vehicles we have on camera at the west gate didn't arrive until 11:54, 7 minutes after your sensor reading. She held Dana's gaze. You logged a contact that wasn't there yet. You moved the men before there was anything to respond to. You were clearing the path. Dana Voss looked at Viscari. Viscari was looking at her with an expression that Evelyn did not want to be on the receiving end of. It was not rage. It was far worse than rage. It was the expression of a man who had already finished his thinking and was now simply looking at a fact. 6 years, he said. Dana held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then something in her posture changed. A small, definitive change. The kind that came when a person stopped maintaining a position and set it down. I have a daughter, she said. Caruso found her 3 years ago, before I understood. She stopped, started again. I didn't have a choice. You had choices, Viscari said. His voice was the same. That was the thing about it, always the same. You made them. They have my daughter, she said. The steadiness in her voice broke on the last word. cleanly, like something snapping. They have had her for 3 years, and if I don't— Where is she? Viscari said. Dana blinked. It was the question she hadn't expected. Evelyn could see that, the way it knocked Dana off the speech she'd been preparing, the one that explained and justified and pleaded, the simple direct question about a fact. I don't— Dana swallowed. They move her. They don't tell me where until they need something from me. Then they tell me she's safe and show me a photograph and tell me what they need next. When did you last see a photograph? 4 days ago. And what did they ask for in exchange? Dana's eyes went to the floor, came back up. Tonight's security rotation, and the location of the holding room for any detainees. Viscari was quiet. I didn't know they were going to kill Marcus, Dana said. I didn't know what they were going to do. I gave them the rotation and the location because they showed me a picture of my daughter and told me she would— She stopped. Her hands were flat on her knees. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm telling you so you understand that there is a child involved who has nothing to do with any of this. Evelyn looked at Viscari. His face was doing something complex and controlled. He stood and moved to the door, and Reeves cycled the locks from outside, and Viscari stepped through without a word. Evelyn looked at Dana. Is the daughter real? She said. Dana looked at her with raw surprise. What? Is there actually a daughter? Or is that the story they gave you to maintain your compliance and give you a narrative that makes it harder for you to confess? Dana's face went through something. She's real, she said. Her voice was stripped of everything now, down to something bare. Her name is Cora. She's 9 years old, and she has her father's eyes, and she is somewhere in this city, and I have been doing everything they asked for 3 years so that she stays alive. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Then she went through the door. Viscari was in the corridor. He had his back against the wall and his arms folded, and he was looking at a point on the opposite wall with the concentrated focus of a man doing something internal and difficult. You believe her, Evelyn said. Yes, he said. About the daughter. Yes. What are you going to do? He looked at her. What I do with everyone who has been used against me, he said. Find out what's real and act accordingly. A pause. The daughter is a loose end that Caruso created. He created it because it's useful leverage. It will stop being useful leverage when I find her. Can you find her? Yes, he said, simply. She looked at him. The corridor was dim, the emergency lighting running still from the backup system, the red-tinted glow that made the world look like something operating on borrowed time. You have a mole in your inner council, she said. You have a financial director who spent 8 months bleeding your accounts. You had an operations coordinator running your security for a compromised network, and Caruso is still out there. She paused. Your organization is exposed in ways you don't have a complete map of yet. I know, he said. The accounts I looked at tonight, the ones with the buffer routing, those were the accounts Marcus Hale managed directly. But he wasn't working alone. If Caruso has been building this for more than a year, there are other financial mechanisms in play, ones I haven't seen. Viscari turned to look at her fully. I need access to the full system, she said. Not the 3 binders from tonight, all of it. Every account, every classification, every operational budget for the last 2 years. That's every financial record my organization has, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her in the dim red corridor, and she looked back at him. And the distance between them was the distance it had been across a cold office floor a few hours ago, when she had pointed at a ledger page and said there, except everything that had happened since then had changed what that distance meant. If you go through those records, he said slowly, you'll know more about the internal architecture of my organization than anyone outside my inner council. Yes, she said. That's not a position I offer lightly. I know, she said. I'm not asking lightly. He looked at her for a long moment that she did not try to fill. There's something else, he said. The way he said it made the hair on her arms stand up again. He reached into his shirt pocket, the same pocket she'd seen him reach into in the office, and removed a folded paper. Not the one from before. A different one. Smaller, printed rather than handwritten. He held it out. She took it. It was a photograph. Printed on standard paper, the resolution slightly degraded from whatever compression it had gone through. It showed a woman, early 20s, dark hair, a face that took Evelyn a moment to process and then hit her like cold water. The face in the photograph was hers. Not from tonight, not from this house. It was older. She could tell by the clothing, the setting behind her, which she recognized with a lurch as the parking structure adjacent to the Harwick Tower offices, where she'd worked Thursday nights until she'd lost the shift. This photo was from before. Weeks, maybe months before Denny Falk found her in the alley. She was being watched before tonight. "Where did you get this?" she said. Her voice came out completely flat, which was the only thing she had left. "It was on Marcus Hale's secondary phone," Viscari said. "Thomas found the phone before Hale was killed. This image was sent to him 6 weeks ago." He paused. "From Caruso." She looked at the photograph in her hands. "They knew about you before I did," Viscari said. "Not what you could do. They couldn't have known that. But your name appears in a financial database that Caruso's people monitor for anomalous entries. You triggered it when you moved the $40 through Ortega's system." He paused. "They flagged you 6 weeks ago as a potential asset or a potential problem, depending on who found you first." The photograph was shaking very slightly. She realized her hands were the reason. "Denny Falk," she said, "was likely being watched," Viscari said. "Ortega's collection operation runs in territory that borders Caruso's. If they flagged your name and then saw Falk going to collect from you—" "They were there tonight," she said. "In the alley." "I believe so," he said. "They were watching to see what happened to me, or waiting to intervene themselves if I hadn't arrived." She stood in the red-lit corridor with the photograph in her hands and worked through what this meant. Not from the outside in, the way you work through something theoretical. From the inside out, from the place in her chest where the understanding was landing with physical weight. She had not been a random woman in an alley. She had been a flagged asset in someone else's intelligence system for 6 weeks. Whatever happened tonight, whatever she decided about staying or leaving, about Viscari's offer, about the records and the exposure in Caruso's network, she had been a piece on a board she hadn't known existed. "They'll come for me," she said. "Yes," Viscari said. "Not because of tonight, because they flagged me 6 weeks ago and they still don't know what I can do. But they will. When Hale's information reaches them fully, yes," he said, "they'll understand what you are." "What am I?" she said. She wasn't asking him. She was saying it out loud because it needed to be said. He answered anyway. "You're the person who read 8 months of Caruso's best work in 2 hours and pointed at the page," he said. "That's what you are." She folded the photograph. She held it in both hands and stood very still in the corridor and felt the full weight of the night pressing down. The ribs, the head, the alley, the books, the attack, Marcus Hale's face, Donna Voss's hands flat on her knees, and now this. A photograph of herself in a parking structure taken weeks ago by people she'd never met, filed under a name she'd thought meant nothing to anyone. "The offer you made me," she said. "The envelope. The exit. Yes. If I take it now, new identity, cash, transportation, how long before Caruso's network finds the new name?" Viscari was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, not strategic. "With what they know about your financial signature," he said carefully, "and the resources they have, weeks. Perhaps less." She looked at him. "So the door isn't open anymore," she said. "The door is open," he said. "What's changed is what's waiting on the other side of it." She stood there with the photograph and the bruised ribs and the blood on her clothes that wasn't all hers, and the full understanding that she had walked into this night as a woman who stole $40 and survived on the margins of a city that did not know she existed, and she was going to walk out of it as something else entirely. The only question remaining was what exactly that something else was going to be, and whether she was going to choose it or whether it was going to be chosen for her. The radio on Reeves' belt crackled. His voice came through the door from the corridor junction, words she couldn't make out. Then the door at the far end opened and Reeve appeared, and his face had the look it had developed over the course of the evening of a man delivering news that kept getting worse. "Mr. Viscari," he said, "Thomas just confirmed the secondary phone's full log." He stopped, looked at Evelyn, looked back at Viscari. "There's a second photograph, different location, same subject." He paused. "Taken inside this house, taken tonight, after she arrived, within the last 2 hours." The corridor went absolutely silent. Someone inside the estate, someone inside the house, inside the grounds. inside the locked and swept perimeter, had photographed Evelyn Mercer after Vescari brought her in, and had sent that photograph to Caruso's network. And that photograph was now in the hands of people who were reorganizing after tonight's failed assault, and would not fail twice in the same way. Caruso didn't just have someone inside Vescari's organization. Caruso had someone inside this house, right now, tonight, who had watched her arrive and had told them everything. The photograph had been taken from inside the house. Vescari didn't say anything for 3 seconds. Evelyn counted them the way she had been counting all night, the way she counted everything now, because numbers were the one thing that didn't lie to her. Then he moved. Not fast. He never moved fast, she was learning, but with the absolute economy of someone who had compressed decision and action into a single motion. He took the radio from Reeves' belt without asking for it and pressed the call button. Tomas. The secondary photo. Timestamp. Static. Then Tomas's voice, slightly compressed. 22:14. Vescari looked at Evelyn. She worked it. 22:14 was 10:14 in the evening. She had arrived at the estate somewhere around 9:40, 9:45. The photograph had been taken approximately 30 minutes after she walked through the door. Location in the house, Vescari said into the radio. Working on it. The image metadata is stripped, but we have a partial window reflection in the frame. East wing, second floor, based on the angle. Evelyn thought about the east wing. Dana Voss had been in the east wing security room, but Dana had already been identified. Dana was in the panic room behind them, which meant the photographer was someone else. Who was in the east wing second floor between 21:40 and 22:30, Vescari said. A pause, longer than she wanted. I'm pulling the interior camera log, Tomas said. Give me 2 minutes. Vescari handed the radio back to Reeve. He looked at Evelyn. His face was the face he always had, controlled, giving nothing. But the quality behind his eyes had changed. There was something in there now that was running hot and being managed with considerable effort. Think, he said to her. Not unkindly. A direction. The photographer is still in the house, she said, or was until recently. They sent the image at 22:14, which was before the attack. They sent your security layout through Dana's information and your personnel photo through someone else. 2 separate channels. Caruso built redundancy into his inside network. Who saw you in the East Wing? Vescari said. I was never in the East Wing, she said. I was in the foyer, the medical room, the bedroom, the office downstairs. And here. The bedroom is East Wing, Reeves said quietly. She stopped. The bedroom. The room with the locked window and the tagged clothes. She had been there for, she counted backward, less than an hour before the attack began. Dr. Reyes had examined her there. One of Vescari's men had escorted her. The hallway outside had a man stationed at the far end, the man at the end of the hallway. She hadn't known his name. She'd looked at him when she'd tested the door, and he'd looked back and then looked away. She hadn't been able to see his face clearly in the hallway light. She had registered him as a stationed guard and filed him under the category of things that were present and not immediately relevant. The man in the hall, she said. Outside the bedroom. Who assigned him? Reeves' face changed. Personnel assignments for interior positions tonight went through Dana, Reeves said. His voice had gone careful. But the East Wing hallway guard was a late substitution. Original assignment was Kern. Kern got pulled to the south perimeter during the pre-attack shuffle. He paused. The substitute was put in by... He stopped. Say it, Vescari said. The log shows the substitution came from Dana's terminal, Reeves said. But the timestamp is 21:52. Dana was in the security room during the sweep at that time. I can verify that independently. He stopped again. The terminal access code used was Dana's, but someone else entered it. Evelyn's mind moved through it fast. Someone who had Dana's access code. Someone who knew the assignment system well enough to make a personnel substitution look routine. Someone who was already positioned in the East Wing before I arrived. The radio crackled. Tomas. Interior camera log for East Wing second floor, 21:40 to 22:30. I have one individual in the corridor adjacent to the guest room who isn't on the assigned manifest. A pause. His name is Garrett Cole. He's been with us for 2 years. Communications and logistics support. Vescari's expression did not change. but his right hand closed at his side very slowly into a shape that was not quite a fist. "Where is Cole now?" he said. The pause that followed lasted 4 seconds and felt like considerably longer. "He's not responding to radio," Tomas said. His last logged position was the East Wing communications room at 2305. Another pause. "Lucian, the communications room has exterior access through the service corridor." Viscari handed the radio back to Reeve and started walking. Evelyn moved before she had decided to. She fell into step behind him, and he didn't tell her to stop, which she took as permission, or at minimum as the absence of prohibition, and they moved through the corridor at a pace that was almost running, Reeve behind her, 2 more men materializing from side passages and falling in without instruction. The service corridor ran along the back of the East Wing, a functional passage with exposed conduit along the ceiling and a floor that was poured concrete rather than the stone of the main house. It smelled of mechanical systems and cold air. At the far end, a door stood partially open. The exterior access Tomas had mentioned, leading out to a covered service approach that connected to the estate's rear grounds. The door was swinging slightly in the outside air. Cole was gone. Viscari stood at the open door and looked out at the grounds. Dark, the emergency lighting not reaching this far back. The tree line 100 meters out is a black mass against the slightly less black sky. His men had swept this area once, post-attack. It was supposed to be clear. He looked at Reeve. "Get the perimeter team on the north side." He went through that tree line. "He's got a 20-minute head start," Reeve said carefully. "Get them moving," Viscari said. Not loud, just final. Reeve moved off with his radio. The 2 other men took positions at the open door, watching the dark grounds. Viscari stood still for a moment. Then he turned and walked back inside, and Evelyn walked with him, and they went back through the service corridor in silence. She thought about what Cole had sent, her photograph, her face, the information that she was inside this estate. By now that photograph had been received and processed, and Caruso knew that Viscari had a new intelligence asset on site. Cole was moving toward whatever extraction Caruso had prepared, and when he arrived, he would give a full debrief. Who she was, what she'd found, how quickly she'd found it. "They'll know everything Cole knows," she said. "Yes," Viscari said, "which is that you have me, that I found the ledger fraud, and that I was still inside the house as of 22:14. She paused. "They don't know what else I've found since then. They don't know about Dana. They don't know you have the secondary phone." "No," he said. "That's a window," she said. He stopped walking, turned to look at her. "Caruso's going to move again," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight cost him." He pulled back. But he had 2 assets inside this house, and now he has neither. And he knows his financial mechanism is blown, and he knows you're looking. He has to move before you consolidate. She worked it through. He'll want to hit before dawn, before you've had time to assess and reorganize. That gives you... She checked the corridor clock, a plain institutional face mounted above a junction. 2:47 in the morning. 3 hours, maybe 4. "I know," he said. "Do you have enough people?" "After tonight." He considered it with the honesty he'd been showing her in increments all night. Enough to hold, not enough to go after him directly. She looked at him. An idea was forming in a part of her mind that she recognized as the part that had looked at accounting entries in a freight company's database 8 months ago and started asking questions it had no business asking. The part that found the $40 mechanism. The part that had said there in the office at 2 in the morning and watched a man's face change. "His money," she said. Viscari was very still. "You have the full account structure now, or you will when I finish going through the records," she said, "including the buffer routing that Marcus built. That routing is still active. It hasn't been dismantled. Caruso doesn't know we found it because Marcus is dead, and Cole only knew about tonight's operation, not the financial architecture." She paused. "The buffer account is still receiving deposits from Caruso's operational budget through Marcus's mechanism. Every dollar Caruso moves through that pipeline is currently sitting in a float account that I can locate, map, and, with the right access, redirect." The corridor was very quiet. "You want to take his money," Viscari said. "I want to move it," she said. "Not take it. Move it into accounts where it becomes visible to people Caruso doesn't want to be visible to." federal monitoring classifications, institutional flags. I can structure the movements to look like Caruso made them himself, the same technique Marcus used, inverted. She met his eyes. If Caruso's operational budget is suddenly appearing in monitored accounts in patterns that suggest he's been conducting wire fraud against his own network partners, his partners stop being partners. His organization starts fracturing from the outside before you have to touch it from the inside. Viscari looked at her for a long time. She held the look. Her ribs hurt. Her head hurt. She had been awake for the entire night, and she was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline anymore, something drier and harder edged. You need full access to execute that, he said. Yes. It's irreversible. Once those movements are made, I know, she said. That's the point. Another long silence. She watched him weigh it. Not her specifically, she understood, but the thing she represented, the position he would be putting her in, the level of operational trust that putting her in it required. She was 24 years old, and she had been in this house for 6 hours, and she was asking him to hand her the financial architecture of his entire organization. If you make a mistake, he said. I don't make mistakes in numbers, she said. I make mistakes in other things, not in numbers. He held her gaze. All right, he said. They went back to the office. The office looked different now than it had 4 hours ago. The same scarred desk, the same cold light, the same shelves. But the night had changed the weight of the room, the way a room changed when serious things had happened in proximity to it. Viscari pulled the filing cabinet open, and this time he pulled everything. Ledgers, binders, ring folders, a locked box he opened with a key from his shirt pocket that contained a thumb drive and a handwritten index. He set it all on the desk in front of her without ceremony. The drive has the digital records, he said. The index maps the classification system. He looked at her. Do you need me here? No, she said. I need quiet. He nodded. He pulled back to the far end of the room, near the door, and stood there with his arms folded, and she understood that was as far as he was going, which was fine. She turned to the desk. She worked. It was different from the first time. The first time she had been reading under the pressure of uncertainty. Not knowing what she was looking for, not knowing whether she would find it, not knowing what it meant for her if she did or didn't. Now she knew the system. She had the architecture in her head from the first reading, the way the accounts were structured and how they communicated. And she could move through the records the way she had learned to move through any complex system. Not linearly, but in the way a mind moved when it was genuinely suited to the work, following the logic of the structure, finding the places where the logic bent. She found 3 additional buffer mechanisms that Marcus had embedded across different operational classifications. Each one was more sophisticated than the last, built in layers that were designed to be found one at a time, so that finding the first would produce a false sense of completion. She mapped them all. She traced the flow of each one to its float account, noted the account identifiers, and then opened the digital records on the drive and found the corresponding digital structure. It was all there. Marcus Hale had been meticulous. The irony of that, the precision, the care, the genuine skill applied to the project of destroying the organization that paid him was not lost on her. She didn't spend time on it. She filed it in the category of things that were true and not useful and moved on. At 4:10 in the morning, she sat back and looked at what she had. I have it, she said. Viscari crossed the room. He stood behind her looking at the desk, at the arranged ledgers and the open drive and the series of handwritten notes she'd made on a piece of paper she'd found in the desk drawer. He looked at it the way he had looked at her finger pointing at the page earlier, with the attention of someone who was following, not leading. The 3 secondary mechanisms go here, here, and here, she said, pointing to her notes. Each float account is in a position to receive. If I initiate the redirects in the right sequence, the movements will read as originating from Caruso's operational accounts directly, because Marcus structured the pipeline with Caruso's authentication codes at the source end. She paused. He was protecting himself. If Caruso ever audited him, the source coding would point back at Caruso's own accounts. He had a weapon pointed in both directions. Escape. Marcus was always careful, Viscari said quietly. It's going to work against Caruso now, she said. Viscari looked at her. Initiate it. She turned to the drive. She pulled up the access interface. Her fingers were steady. She had noticed that about herself over the years. Under genuine pressure, the shaking stopped. It was only in the aftermath, when the pressure lifted, that her hands remembered they were afraid. She began to move the money. It took 40 minutes. Each redirect required a sequence of entries that had to be correct in both substance and timing. Too fast, and the system would flag the velocity. Too slow, and the window of authenticity in the source coding would expire. She moved through it with the focus of someone performing surgery, each entry deliberate, each timing gap held exactly. Viscari stood behind her and did not speak. At 4:52 in the morning, she entered the final sequence and sat back. "It's done," she said. The silence in the room was different from all the previous silences. It had weight and finality in it. She had just moved a significant amount of criminal money through a mechanism designed by a dead man, in a way that would appear to federal monitoring systems as Caruso's own operation laundering against itself. And there was no version of what she had just done that was reversible or that left her standing on the outside of this world looking in. She knew that. She had known it when she sat down. Viscari moved to the desk and looked at the final entry on the screen. He stood there for a moment. "You understand what you've done," he said. Not accusatory, factual. "I understand what I've done," she said. He looked at her. Something in his face had been shifting all night in increments she had been tracking, the measuring quality giving way to something else in stages, each stage produced by a specific thing she had said or done or found. And the thing in his face now was not the measuring quality at all. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She waited. "The envelope," he said. "The exit I offered you, the new identity, the cash." "Yes. It was real," he said. "I want you to know that. It was a genuine offer." "I know it was," she said. "I don't make offers I don't mean." "I know that too," she said. "That's partly why I'm still here." He was quiet for a moment. "There were things about tonight I could have managed differently," he said. "You were brought into a situation without full information about the risk. That's on me." She looked at him. "Denny Falk was going to crack my ribs in an alley over $40, she said. "My risk calculus tonight started from a different baseline than yours." He held her gaze. "Fair," he said. The radio in his pocket crackled. He pulled it out. Tomas's voice, tighter now, compressed in a way that hadn't been there before. "Lucian, Cole made contact with Caruso's people at the North Tree Line. We had a team there. There was an exchange." A pause. "We have Cole, but Caruso's people got out." Another pause. "And we just picked up 3 vehicles on the East Road, moving toward the estate, no plates, moving fast." Viscari's hand closed around the radio. "How far?" he said. 4 minutes, Tomas said. "Maybe less." Evelyn stood up from the desk. She looked at Viscari. He was already looking at her. "The redirects," he said. "How long before they register in the monitoring system?" "They already registered," she said, "the moment I entered the final sequence. The flags go up in real time." "Then Caruso's financial network is already compromised." "Yes." "But he's still coming," Viscari said. "He doesn't know yet," she said. "He's coming because Cole told him about me. He's coming to get to me before you can use me again." She held Viscari's gaze steadily. "He's coming because I'm the threat now. Not your men, not your perimeter. Me." The room was absolutely still for 1 second. Then Viscari spoke, and what he said was not what she expected. Not a command to his men, not a tactical instruction, not a direction to move her to the panic room. What he said was quieter than all of those things, and landed harder. "Stay close to me," he said. And somewhere outside the estate walls, 4 minutes away and closing fast through the dark, 3 vehicles with no plates came down the East Road carrying men who had one objective. And the night that had started with rain and a woman on the ground was about to decide, in the next few minutes, what it had all been for. Evelyn picked up her handwritten notes from the desk, folded them, and put them in her pocket. Then she followed Lucian Viscari out of the office and into whatever was coming next, and she did not look back at the desk or the drive or the ledgers or the life she had been living 6 hours ago, because none of those things were the life she was living now. And the woman who had pressed her cheek against a wet alley floor and waited for the next kick to land would not have recognized the woman walking out of that office. Steady-handed, clear-eyed, moving toward the sound of engines in the dark, like someone who had finally found the ground beneath her feet and intended to keep it. The Eastgate camera came up on Reeves' handheld monitor as they entered the main corridor, and they could all see the headlights now. 3 sets, close together, moving fast. And Tomas's voice came through the radio one more time with 5 words that made everything that had happened in the last 6 hours converge into a single sharp point. "They're not slowing down," Tomas said. The headlights did not slow down. Evelyn saw them on Reeves' monitor. 3 bright points moving through the dark at the speed of people who had committed to something and were past the point of reconsidering it. 4 minutes had become 3. 3 was becoming 2. The East Road ran straight for the final quarter mile before the gate. No curves, no cover, and the vehicles were using that straightness the way you used a runway. Viscari was already moving. "Tomas," he said into the radio, "collapse the east perimeter inward. Don't hold the gate. Pull everyone back to the main house and set positions at the courtyard entry and the north corridor junction. Let them come to us." "Confirmed," Tomas said. "And get Dana Voss to the interior holding room," Viscari said. "She stays contained until this is done." Evelyn moved beside him through the main corridor, Reeve behind them, 2 more men falling in from the side passage. The house was moving around them. She could feel it, the way large, organized things moved when they had purpose. Footsteps converging, doors being secured, the percussive sounds of positions being taken up at windows and corridors. "You're letting them inside the perimeter," she said. "The perimeter is already compromised," he said. "I'd rather fight inside ground I know than outside ground they've had time to study." He looked at her as they moved. "There's a room at the end of the north corridor. Stone walls, 1 entrance, no windows. You're going there." "I'm not." "You are," he said. Not loud. Just final. The way everything he said was final. "What you did tonight with those accounts, that doesn't end if you're dead. It ends if I'm dead. We need at least one of us functional when this is over." She looked at him. He looked back with the expression she had been learning all night, the one that was not the measuring quality anymore, that had become something else over the course of 6 hours and a lot of blood. "There's a man named Reeve," Viscari said. "I know who Reeve is," she said. "He stays with you," Viscari said. "He doesn't leave that room for any reason, including if someone on the radio tells him to. The only voice that moves him is mine, live, in person." He looked at Reeve. "Understood." "Understood," Reeve said. They split at the corridor junction. Viscari went left toward the courtyard entry. Evelyn went right with Reeve, and she did not look back because looking back felt like the wrong thing to do, like a superstition she didn't believe in but wasn't going to test tonight. The room at the end of the north corridor was exactly what Viscari had described. Stone, single entrance, the kind of walls that had been built when walls were built to mean something. There was a bench along one side and a light overhead that ran on the backup system, producing the same dim red-tinted glow she had been living inside all night. Reeve posted at the door facing out, and she stood in the center of the room and listened. She heard the vehicles hit the gate. The impact was not like the explosions earlier. Those had been prepared charges, deliberate, with the specific character of shape destruction. This was raw impact, metal against metal and stone, the sound of vehicles used as battering instruments. It came through the stone walls of the room as vibration more than sound, felt in the sternum and the soles of the feet. Then the gunfire started. It was different from the perimeter engagement earlier. That had been spread out, the sound diffuse, distributed across the estate's breadth. This was concentrated. The courtyard, she thought. The main approach. The sound compressed by the house's walls into something sharper and more immediate. She could hear individual weapon reports within the general roar of it, could track roughly how many positions were engaged and from which directions. The way she tracked columns in a ledger, looking for the structure beneath the noise. Reeve had his weapon out. He was looking down the corridor toward the junction, his back partially toward her, his whole attention narrowed to the entry point. She stood and listened and counted and thought. Caruso had sent 3 vehicles. Based on the earlier assault, she estimated 8 to 12 men. Viscari had consolidated his personnel inside. She didn't know how many were left after the night's casualties, but the men she'd seen moving through the house had the quality of people who had been doing this long enough to be effective, even tired and damaged and down in number. The fight in the courtyard would be violent and brief because both sides were running on the same compressed timeline. Caruso needed to reach her before the financial damage she'd done became fully processed by the monitoring systems, and Vescari needed to end this before his people exhausted what they had left. Brief was not the same as clean. She heard a man shout something, not words she could decode, just the raw sound of a human voice under extreme stress, and then a burst of fire that was closer than the courtyard, somewhere in the main corridor to the left of the junction. She heard running. She heard something heavy fall. Then she heard nothing for approximately 40 seconds, which was the worst 40 seconds of the entire night. Reeve had gone very still in the doorway. The nothing ended with footsteps in the corridor outside, coming from the right, from the junction, moving fast. Reeve raised his weapon. His hands were steady, she noted, completely steady. The stillness of someone whose fear had long ago been converted into something more useful. Tomas came around the junction at a low run and pulled up short when he saw Reeve's weapon. He put his hands up briefly in the practiced acknowledgement of someone who understood the protocol. "Stand down," he said. "It's me." Reeve lowered slightly but did not fully stand down. "Verbally confirm," he said. "Tomas Reeve Lucian North Room confirmed," Tomas said, the phrase rapid and clearly pre-established, the kind of code that got set up when organizations expected exactly this kind of confusion. Reeve lowered fully. Tomas came into the room. He was breathing hard, controlled, but the effort was visible. There was blood on the left side of his face, not his, she thought, or not entirely his, and his jacket was torn at the shoulder. "Courtyard is held," he said. "We lost 2 more. Caruso's people are inside the east entry. 3 of them got through before we closed the corridor junction." He looked at Evelyn. "They know where you are. Cole debriefed them before we picked him up. They have a layout of the house." "Vescari," she said. "Holding the east entry with 4 men," Tomas said. "He told me to come here." She thought about what that meant. Vescari, with 4 men, holding a corridor entry against 3 of Caruso's people who had already survived the courtyard engagement, while sending his most experienced available man to stand in a stone room with a woman who was not a fighter. "He's drawing them," she said. Tomas looked at her. "He's holding the east entry visibly so they focus on him," she said. "He wants them looking at the east entry, not looking for this room." Tomas's jaw moved. "That's one way to read it. Is there another way?" He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. She moved to the doorway. Reeve shifted to block it, not aggressively, just with the patient solidity of someone doing a job. "Move," she said. "No," Reeve said. "I'm not going to the east entry," she said. "I'm going to the office." Both men looked at her. "The account redirects are done," she said, "but the monitoring system flags take time to generate enforcement action. Hours, maybe. Caruso might not know the extent of the damage yet, but his financial people will be looking at anomalies right now, and if they understand what happened before the enforcement flags mature, they can potentially begin countermoves." She held Reeve's gaze. "The mechanism Marcus built has a kill switch, a sequence that reverses the redirect pipeline and closes the float accounts. Marcus built it for his own protection. If Caruso ever moved against him, he needed a way to dissolve the evidence fast. I saw it in the records. I didn't touch it because I didn't need to." She paused. "Caruso's people will find it. If they get to the drive before the flags mature, they can potentially undo everything I did tonight." The corridor was quiet for a moment. The gunfire from the east entry reduced to isolated bursts. "The drive is in the office," she said. Reeve looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at her with the expression of a man running calculations he didn't like the results of. "You want to go to the office and destroy the drive," Tomas said. "I want to go to the office and wipe the kill switch sequence," she said, physically removing it from the drive's accessible architecture. "Without that sequence, the redirects are irreversible from this end. Caruso's people could have the best forensic accountants in the country, and they couldn't undo it." She paused. "It takes 4 minutes. I know exactly what I'm looking at." Tomas was quiet. 4 minutes, she said. "Then this is over financially, regardless of what happens tonight." Tomas looked at Reeve. A look passed between them that was the compressed communication of people who had worked together long enough to have a language that didn't need words. Then Tomas got his radio up. Lucien, he said. Static. Then Viscari's voice, slightly compressed, and she could hear in the background of it the specific sounds of the east entry holding. Go. She wants to go to the office, Tomas said. 4 minutes. The drive. A pause. Longer than she expected. Thomas goes with her, Viscari said. Reeves stays on the north corridor. 4 minutes, then she goes back. Confirmed, Thomas said. They moved. The office was not far. 2 corridors and a stairwell, distances that had seemed navigable when she'd walked them with Viscari hours ago, and that now had the compressed dangerous quality of distances crossed under fire. Tomas moved ahead of her, weapon up, checking each junction before committing to it. She stayed close. Her ribs registered every quick movement with the fidelity of something that had been waiting for her to stop ignoring it, and she ignored it. They reached the office. The door was as she'd left it. She went straight to the desk, to the drive, to the interface. She found the kill switch sequence in 40 seconds. It was where she'd seen it in the records, embedded in the drive's transfer architecture under a classification heading that would look like routine system maintenance to anyone who didn't know what Marcus Hale's coding logic looked like from the inside. She deleted it, not the drive. She left everything else intact, every record, every redirect, the full documentation of 8 months of financial betrayal. She deleted the kill switch and the 3 backup instances of it that Marcus had buried in adjacent directories. And she did it with the clean precision of someone removing a specific thread from a piece of fabric without disturbing anything around it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Done, she said. Thomas was at the door, watching the corridor. He looked back. You're sure? Yes, she said. She pulled the drive from the port and held it. She thought for 1 second about what was on it, what it represented, what it meant for Caruso's network, for the people who had been running money through Marcus Hale's mechanism for 8 months. And then she put it in her pocket beside the folded paper notes and stood up from the desk. They went back through the corridors. The East Entry engagement had resolved itself in their absence. She knew it before she heard it because the house had gone quiet in the specific way that spaces went quiet after violence, not peaceful, but emptied. The way a room felt after something had been removed from it that had been taking up a great deal of space. Thomas heard it too. He moved faster. They came around the junction to the East Entry corridor, and she saw it in stages. 4 of Viscari's men at positions along the corridor walls, one of them seated with his back against the wall and his hand pressed to his side. One of Caruso's vehicles, visible through the reinforced entry door's side window, stopped at an angle that suggested it had not been parked so much as ended. 3 men on the floor of the corridor who were not Viscari's. Viscari was standing at the far end. He was upright, which was what she registered first. Upright and facing the entry door, and when he heard them come around the junction, he turned, and she crossed the distance between them in a walk that was almost running, and stopped 3 feet from him and looked at him with the thorough assessment she had been applying to everything all night. His arm was bleeding again through the dressing Dr. Reyes had applied. Not badly. The movement had reopened the wound rather than enlarged it. There was a cut above his right eyebrow that was new and had bled down the side of his face. He was breathing at the rate of someone who had been doing physical work under stress for an extended period and was now managing the descent. "You're bleeding," she said. "You said that already," he said. "It was true then too," she said. Something moved through his face, not quite the almost smile from earlier. Something quieter and less guarded than that, something that had the quality of a thing setting down a weight it had been carrying for a long time. "Is it done?" he said. "The kill switch is gone," she said. "The redirects are permanent. Caruso's financial structure is going to start fragmenting when his network partners see the monitoring flags. His operational funding is going to become a liability instead of an asset." She paused. "It won't happen overnight, but it will happen." Viscari looked at her steadily. "And Cole?" "In custody," Tomas said from behind her. "And Caruso's men tonight." Tomas's tone shifted slightly. "The 3 who came through the East Entry are down. The courtyard team retreated when they lost the entry breach. We have 2 vehicles intact outside." "Caruso himself," Evelyn said. "Was not in these vehicles," Viscari said. "He sent his people." He looked toward the entry door, toward the dark outside. "He will understand by morning what happened to his money. And he will understand that attacking this house twice in one night, cost him more than he recovered. "He'll come again," she said. "Not soon, but eventually." "Yes," Viscari said, "he will." He looked back at her. "But the next time he comes against a different architecture than the one he's been studying for a year. Different financial structure, different personnel security, different operational protocols." He held her gaze. "Different intelligence." She understood what he meant by that last word, what it meant and what it asked. She stood in the east entry corridor of a damaged house in the last hour before dawn, with blood that was not all hers on her clothes, and a drive in her pocket that contained the evidence of something she had done tonight that could not be undone. And she looked at Lucien Viscari and understood that the question of what she was going to do next had already been answered. Not in this moment, not even in the moment when she'd sat down at the desk and begun moving Caruso's money, but somewhere earlier than that, somewhere in the hours between the alley and the office, in the space between "bring her to me" and "there," in the accumulation of a night that had taken everything she was and asked whether it was enough. It had been enough. That was the thing she hadn't known about herself until tonight. She had known she was smart. She had known she could read systems. She had known she could survive because surviving was the skill she had been practicing since she was old enough to understand that no one was going to do it for her. But she hadn't known, until a man had set 3 binders in front of her and stepped back, that she was enough. "I need a real workspace," she said. Viscari blinked, which was, she was learning, his version of genuine surprise. "The office," she said. "I need more than what's in that cabinet. Full digital access, proper architecture, a system I can actually work in." She met his eyes. "If you want me to build what I think I can build, a financial intelligence network that can read Caruso's remaining operations from the outside, track his money movements, identify his remaining inside assets before they're activated, I need the right tools." Viscari looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was quiet around them. Tomas was a respectful distance away. The man with the hand pressed to his side had been helped upright by one of the others and was being moved toward the interior of the house. "You'll have it," Viscari said. "And I need something else," she said. He waited. "Dana Voss's daughter," she said. "Cora. 9 years old, somewhere in this city. You said you could find her." "I said I could find her," he confirmed. "Then find her," Evelyn said. "Before anything else. Before the workspace, before the system, before any of the rest of it." She held his gaze. Dana did what she did because someone took her child and held her with it for 3 years. Whatever else is true about what she did, there's a 9-year-old girl in this city who has nothing to do with any of it. The corridor was very still. "That matters to you," Viscari said. "Not a challenge. An observation, delivered with care. I spent 3 years in this city completely alone," she said. "I know what it feels like to have no one coming for you." She paused. "Someone should go for the kid." Viscari held her gaze for a long moment. She could not fully read his expression, but she could read the quality of the silence around it. The kind of silence that a person produced when something they had not expected moved them in a direction they had not anticipated. "I'll have a team on it within the hour," he said. She nodded. The first light of the day was beginning to show at the edges of the entry door's side window. Not real light yet, just the absolute dark becoming a slightly less absolute dark, the sky beginning its long argument with night. She looked at it and registered in a distant and factual way that she had not slept since the previous morning, that her ribs had been making their case increasingly loudly for the last hour, and that the thing running through her in place of adrenaline was going to run out soon and leave her with only the accumulated weight of the night. She would deal with that. She was good at dealing with what remained after the thing that had been carrying her gave out. That was, when she thought about it honestly, the core skill of her life. Not the accounting, not the reading, not the ability to find patterns in complex systems. The core skill was this, remaining functional after the support structure failed. She had been practicing it since she was 17 years old and had packed one bag and gotten on a bus away from Carlisle, and she had been practicing it every day since. Tonight she had just practiced it in a different context than usual. Viscari came to stand beside her at the entry door's window, looking out at the first gray suggestion of morning over the estate grounds. She was aware of his proximity. The deliberate way it was not accidental, the choice it represented from a man who made all his choices deliberately. "The warning I gave you," he said, "about staying. You told me there was no ordinary life in this, she said. I remember. I want you to hold that, he said. Not as a threat, as a fact. The next months are going to be difficult. Caruso's network isn't gone. It's damaged. He'll reorganize. There will be responses to tonight, to the financial disruption, to the loss of his inside assets. It will not be clean or quiet. I'm aware, she said. I want you aware, he said. Not frightened. Aware. She looked at him. Do I seem frightened to you? He held her gaze. No, he said. You don't. Good, she said. Outside, the gray light was increasing, the shapes of the damaged estate grounds becoming visible. The blackened structure on the west side, the stopped vehicles in the courtyard, the men moving through the grounds in the systematic post-engagement pattern she had been watching on monitors all night. It looked, in the flat early light, like the aftermath of something that had cost a great deal and been survived rather than won. There was a difference. She understood that. Survival and winning were different accountings of the same event, and she had learned tonight to be precise about the difference. Thomas appeared at Viscari's shoulder. Cole is secure. Dr. Reyes is with the two critical. We need decisions on the outer perimeter before full light. Give me 5 minutes, Viscari said. Tomas moved away. Not far. He was a man who had learned to be close enough without being present. Go get your arm looked at again, Evelyn said. Viscari glanced at the dressing. It's minor. You said that before, she said. You were wrong then, too. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize over the course of the night as the one she was least prepared for. Not the power, not the control, not the calculation, but the thing that lived underneath all of those. The thing that didn't have a practiced face because it didn't come out often enough to have developed one. I'll find you a proper workspace today, he said. I know you will, she said. And Cora Voss will be found, he said. I know that too, she said. He stood beside her for another moment in the gray early light, and she stood beside him, and neither of them said anything else, because what needed to be said had been said in increments over 6 hours of blood and ledgers and locked windows and an alley in the rain, and the silence now was not the silence of things withheld, but of things settled. He walked away to deal with what the morning required of him. She stayed at the window for a moment longer. She looked at the damaged grounds, the gray sky, the slow return of color to a world that had spent the night in darkness and emergency light. She looked at it with the eyes of a woman who had come into this house as property, recovered from an alley, and was leaving the night's darkness as something she didn't have a clean word for yet. Not employee, not captive, not ally exactly, though alliance was closer to the truth than anything else. Something that would need its own word eventually. Something that had been built, specific and functional, in the space of one long, terrible night. She reached into her pocket. She took out the drive and looked at it. Small, unremarkable. The kind of object that looked like nothing and contained everything. She took out the folded photograph of herself in the parking structure. She looked at the woman in it, slightly blurred, unaware of being watched, existing in a world where $40 was the measure of everything and the alley was 6 weeks away. She put the drive back in her pocket. She folded the photograph smaller and held it in her closed hand for a moment. Then she let it fall. It hit the corridor floor face down, and she left it there. And she walked away from the entry door and deeper into the house, toward the sound of Viscari's voice and the work that was already waiting for her. And the woman in the parking structure stayed on the floor behind her, and the morning continued its quiet, indifferent approach over the ruined grounds of an estate that had survived the night and was already, in the ways that mattered, beginning to rebuild. The rain had stopped at some point while she wasn't paying attention. She hadn't noticed it stop, just as she hadn't noticed, in Denny Falk's alley, the precise moment when the night decided to send a convoy of black vehicles around the corner instead of the next kick. The world made its largest moves quietly, without announcement, in the spaces between the things you were watching. She knew that now in a way she hadn't the night before. She filed it under things that were true and useful, and she kept walking,